This podcast is not sponsored or supported by any business or organization. The views reflected on these podcast episodes are my own. Be aware I am not a medical doctor, travel agent, or any other kind of expert. But I hope you still enjoy. Hey friends, welcome to the Gluten Free Advocate, a Substack and podcast that helps me process my health journey and my determination to pretend that those health conditions don't exist at all. If you're looking for tips, tricks, and learnings for traveling the world with celiac disease and type 1.5 diabetes, you have come to the right place. Now, let's get started. Hey folks, welcome back. This podcast is formerly known as Eat, Explore, Love. The podcast is now the Gluten Free Advocate. And there's been a lot of changes since we last chatted, and let's just get into it. So essentially, when I last left you, we had just had an election that I had worked on tirelessly for months and months, did not sleep for those months and months. I worked and volunteered, and things did not go the way that I had planned. So I needed a reset. I needed to figure out my life. I felt all the creativity literally sucked out of me. It was crazy. But now I feel rejuvenated. I've gotten to get my life back together a little bit. I don't even know if I even got my life back together because, to be honest, was it ever together? And I don't know that it is now. But with all of that said, I have been able to get myself to a place where I feel like the creative juices are flowing. I'm really excited to be, chatting with people, and hopefully somebody learns from my story and figures out how to apply the things that I've learned to their own life. And not that I think that anything I have to say is all that inspiring, but I know I have one avid listener, and it's my cousin Tommy. So if for nothing else, it's to keep Tommy entertained and coming back and hearing about my journey and my experiences and things that I'm going to get to do for next year or for this year. I'm recording this on New Year's Eve, so next year is tomorrow for me. But essentially, to recap what my first season was about, I was living in Italy, and I was attempting to get my dual citizenship over there. And essentially, things were not going as planned. Anytime anything could have gone wrong, went wrong, failed miserably, and to the point where I lost my job. There was a layoff. Nothing to do with me trying to get my dual citizenship and working in Europe, but just some companies made some bad financial decisions, and my department was, out there. Basically, I tried to make the best out of the time that I had in Europe, and just so much was happening so quickly. I started writing a blog to help people of where I was eating that was gluten-free and what was good, what was bad, what was otherwise. So in last season, the whole goal was to first and foremost share experiences of me living over there and to process everything that was happening, because things were changing and happening so quickly, and I was experiencing so many new things at once. And I was doing it in a written form, but there were several requests from some family members that they would love to listen to it. And they didn't want to have to read anything. So I did this podcast, and then once my layoff happened, I decided to take it a little bit more seriously and try my hat at podcasting in a real sense, and interviewed a lot of great folks, anything that was to do with eating or exploring or on the self-exploration journey. And again, that came to an end, and when I couldn't figure out if the podcast still made sense. My listenership was not going up. I was not making the intended impact, and I felt like there were so many other podcasts that were doing a much better job than I ever could. So I decided to just call it a day and just literally build my life back from the ground up. Has anyone started paying attention to any of my stuff since then? Not really. Perhaps a little bit more on TikTok, but I kept meeting new people. I kept telling my story to new people. And I kept hearing other people's stories and kept getting inspired, and went through one hell of a health journey this past year. And I decided, you know what, now that this is all as figured out as it's going to get, 2026 is going to be an incredible year, and I'm going to get back to traveling The one thing that I'm not seeing is there's a lot of content out there about the beginnings of a diagnosis and the journey of figuring that all out. But I'm not seeing as much content about you get a diagnosis that's life altering, could be earth shattering depending upon your life situation. And nothing was talking about life beyond you figuring all that stuff out and how life can still be lived. And the importance of constantly having to advocate for yourself. And maybe it's a great podcast, or I would like it to be a podcast where family members can listen. The family members of those that have any type of health condition, of the constant advocacy that is happening for yourself and for others when you have anything like myself that's autoimmune related. So that's what I'm hoping to do with this podcast, is to, through the lens of just living my best life next year or this year, because you're listening to it and I've already gotten started on my journey by the time this episode comes out, and just doing the best I can to show that look at all the opportunities that are out there when your life is quote unquote more difficult. So that's basically a recap of season 1 and why I'm back. And I have alluded to a lot of it, so let's catch up on what had happened in the last year as far as my health journey. So for those of you that did not listen to that last season of the podcast, that's totally fine. About 15 years ago, my health journey started. So this is what happened this past year is not new for me. I unfortunately have had a lot of doctor's visits, a lot of really bad scares, a lot of really great news, and a lot of really bad news, and a lot of blood, sweat, tears, awfulness, and then triumph. So basically the last year encapsulates the past 15 in 1 year. But 15 years ago, I was diagnosed with celiac disease. For those of you that don't know my story, my brother was diagnosed first. So he is 13 months younger than I. He is also autistic. So that kind of complicated things a little bit. When we were 13, 14 years old, he stopped growing and he totally fell off the growth chart. And they were trying to figure out what was wrong. Why was that happening to my brother? Granted, I was also really small, but no one was concerned about that. And it was always the assumption that my family on both sides is rather petite. And so that's what for me, it was genetics, but for my brother, there was something wrong. Spoiler alert, there was also something wrong here. I should have been a couple of inches taller, probably. And I always tease my mom that maybe if you loved me more, I would be taller. But she sometimes laughs at that. So anyway, he stopped growing. He was not on the growth chart, and they did a bunch of blood work, and one of the results that came back was positive for celiac disease. And they said, it's a long shot, but it's genetic, so you should get the rest of your children tested. I'm one of 4 kids, and 3 out of the 4 of us have celiac disease. So that was fun. And I hope to interview my mom at some point this year, because the one perspective that I didn't really get to hear about for her was her side of that. So I hope that, with enough peer pressure that she'll come on. And I don't actually think it'll take that much, but hopefully she will. I was the only one out of the 3 of us that had been diagnosed. And by the way, the 4th child, she does have the markers for celiac disease. So there's still time. There's still time for her life to be turned upside down. And for her to join what we're going to call the cool kids club by eating gluten free. So then I was the only one that got the endoscopy, and that my villi were essentially flattened. And if you want to know more about celiac disease, there's a bunch of other podcasts that delve into that, and I can recommend those in the description of my show notes, and you can see and check it out and be part of the excitement of the gluten-free or the celiac disease community that is out there. I don't feel the need to rehash it, and I'm not a scientist. I failed all science classes in school, so I'm not going to be great about describing what celiac disease is when you break it down that way. But for the villi were flat, so essentially saying damage was done, and I had to repair the damage and then move on ahead. Because damage had been done, once my gut and my intestines started to repair itself, It kind of was Pandora's box. You often find that people with celiac disease usually start to feel better. They feel a new lease on life, more energy, all these other things once they start eating gluten-free because their body had not been absorbing nutrients for so long. And I was asymptomatic leading up to my diagnosis as far as, I could see it. So with all of that said, the struggle for me was I didn't feel any better. I actually felt worse starting to eat gluten-free. It was a really tough journey, and I went through the 5 stages of grief, and I did everything I could I was in denial that this was actually going to be a lifelong thing. I tried bargaining with the doctor. I tried bargaining with my mother. I tried every step of the way to not have to eat gluten-free. And once I started feeling worse, that kind of kicked into high gear. So that started my medical journey. I was diagnosed with a condition called gastroparesis, which essentially means that my stomach had a hard time breaking things down. So I had to stop being able to eat salads and raw vegetables and anything high content in fat, things like that. So it was hard for me to digest meats for a while. I had to take a break, and I had to fall in love with eating fish. I hated fish beforehand. Now I love it. But that journey was because of the gastroparesis. I also have a bunch of intolerances like to sorbitol. So I had to get a special type of toothpaste. If my breath smells, I can't have gum because there's sorbitol in gum. I remember telling my doctor, I'm not eating for days, and my stomach is still hurting, and all I'm doing is having a stick of gum, and that should have triggered it, and maybe look at the ingredients in the gum. But then there was maltose, fructose, lactose, and a bunch of other things, and I ignore most of those except for the sorbitol, which I do not recommend. I am not a doctor. Do not come here for your medical advice, but because my diet has been limited so much, I kind of take it in stride of what makes me feel worse and how close am I to home and how long am I going to be out before, based on what I'm going to say I'm not going to have. So like Carvel ice cream, that's an ice cream shop primarily in the north. It's soft serve ice cream for those of you that are down south, because I'm living down south now, and there is absolutely no Carvel, and it's very upsetting. But that's something I only have when I'm at my parents' house, because that, for whatever reason, my body reacts badly to that. Other ice cream's fine for whatever reason. Carvel. So anyway, so that took 10 years to be diagnosed with all of those things. So I don't want to make it seem like it happened overnight. It didn't. It took a long, long time. And that was really frustrating. And talking with doctors and men, when my father would come, they would shake his hand and they would ask him questions about me, and I wasn't even living with him at the time. He was just there as a second set of ears, and all these things were incredibly frustrating to me. I've been told by doctors that it was all inside my head, the pain, and well, you're eating gluten-free and all of that's coming back, fine. So there's no other issues that you have. And that was really difficult to understand. But finally I found the right doctors, and this is the important part about advocacy. You have to keep pushing and go through the tough journey of your body. And granted, if don't be a nutcase if there's you feel like there's something wrong and you're going to all these different types of specialists and none of them are seeing anything. Proceed with caution and maybe check back in with yourself and say, okay, is this what I'm feeling? And really thoroughly, I had to really take stock of and track my symptoms and when things were happening, because I also deal with chronic pain, and were certain things making it worse. And I started to track that, and I would go, and I became quite neurotic. I'm a neurotic personality as it is, and this certainly didn't help that. But it got to a point where I finally found a doctor that saw the proof in the pudding and worked with me, and was also perplexed by the results that they were seeing, because I was just too specific to be able to make it up. So that was a really tough journey. So I did all of my doctor's appointments with all of these doctors and this network of doctors that I had built in New York that I trusted implicitly. And before I went to Italy, got a clean bill of health from everybody. I went to Italy and I was walking a lot. I was active. And if you've been to Europe at all, you know that walking the streets of Europe is not the same as walking the streets of, the United States. It's really difficult, not exactly the easiest terrain. And if you're in a not a border town, but a coastal town. That's what it is, coastal town. You're going to be experiencing things like really rough terrains and steep uphill climbs and narrow streets and all that fun stuff. So it's not like I was just sitting on my bum eating a lot of pasta and carbs and not really doing anything. I was fairly active. I remember going to Florence with my father and going up a hill, and I was not winded at all. And I think that surprised him because he has a narrative of me that I am incredibly out of shape. And though that might be true, I don't know. There are certain ways where I don't have a six pack. So I'm going to say, yeah, you're right. I have a shape around my stomach and it is round. It is not in a shape. But that's fine. But I had endurance and that's what I needed. I came back. The only complaint that I had was if I didn't eat every 2 hours on the dot, I would start to feel like I was going to pass out and would get the shakes and it would be really bad. So I said, hey, can you just check to my new doctor in North Carolina where I ended up moving after coming back to the United States? I said, hey, can you just check because I think I'm going to have something to do with hypoglycemia. And if you look back at my podcast episodes, one of the episodes is chatting with Edwin Robinson, and we did some genetic testing with me, and it turned out that that was a thing that I needed to look into. So with all that said, I got my blood work done and came back, and my A1C was at, I believe, a 9. And for reference, it should be at like a 5. And I remember being in shock, and my fasting glucose numbers, I don't remember where they were at for that particular test because the A1C number was the thing that they were like, hey, you're pretty darn close to where you could have been in the hospital. And I remember it just being super stressful. And I was in shock because I knew when you have celiac disease, that type 2 diabetes, I also have it on both sides of my family. So genetics wise, it was bound to happen. It just didn't make sense for it to be happening so soon and so quickly. And a lot of my family members that have type 2 diabetes, the type of symptoms are similar for type 2 and type 1, but I wasn't experiencing things in the same way that they were experiencing them with type 2. Something felt off, and I don't know how to describe it, but it was quite harrowing because it was like, okay, well, type 2 means diet and exercise. That's the issue, and it can go away. But I couldn't get stuck off of diet. I didn't know what to do for my diet, because it had been so limited already with all the different intolerances, allergies, not allergies, but the autoimmune conditions that I had. It was quite difficult already to eat and enjoy my life. And now it was about to become more difficult. And they just prescribed me 2 metformin a day and going to the gym and eating healthier. And we'll check it again in 6 months. Good luck to you. And I remember my grandfather told me my response was a little bit dramatic, but I don't think it was. I definitely had tears. There were tears that were shed. I was quite upset. And I think it's easy for someone that only has type 2 to say, what are you getting so upset about? Just eat healthier and just exercise more. And it's like, but I don't think I could be doing any more than what I'm doing. And because again, depending upon how I work out, it makes my chronic pain worse, not better in certain scenarios. And I didn't want to aggravate anything and like be in more pain for the sake of my blood work. It was a lot. It was a really, really overwhelming prospect. And it just, 1 + 1 was not equaling 2 here for me and how I felt. But I followed a really strict keto diet, which was incredibly difficult. And I had to cook every meal. And my A1C only went down to like an 8 or maybe a 7.5 3 months later. And I was initially on 2 metformin a day, but this is probably too gross, but you're listening to a podcast about celiac disease. So I was having gastrointestinal issues. We'll put it that way. Severe gastrointestinal issues. And I got convinced the doctor, please only bring it down to 1 pill a day. So I was having a very strict diet. I was on metformin, and 3 months later, my A1C didn't really drop in the way that they thought it should with what I was eating and how active I was, and taking my medication religiously. And I told the doctor, hey, my diet's really limited. This is not sustainable for me to cook every meal. I'm a freelancer. Some jobs are, I could work 14-hour days, or I can work no days, but this cooking every single day, 3 meals a day for this keto diet is not sustainable. And yeah, I could cook earlier in the day, but I needed to find a more realistic solution because I knew with my job that there was a possibility I was going to start, traveling again, and I needed a system that worked for that. It's getting really dark in here. So for those of you that are watching on video, I'm going to turn on a light. All right, I'm back. Can we tell I'm getting back into the swing of things? Oh my goodness. So anyway, I said to my doctor, hey, I'll give this one more shot. I'll do the 2 metformin a day, but I need to be able to eat what I've got to eat to have a more sustainable life balance. And she agreed. She thought that that was the right thing to do. So I was taking 2 metformin a day, having very severe gastrointestinal issues, eating a healthy diet, but still able to, like for lunch, I would allow myself to have a frozen meal. Probably not the best, but it was like on the healthier side of what you could do. I was having the healthiest breakfast that I could, but in a way that was, again, sustainable for me no matter what my life was at any given moment in time. My way of doing it is I always think about life of I operate with the worst case scenario. And if I could do the worst case scenario, then should I go forward and do it? So I wanted to build my worst case scenario plan and make sure that no matter how crazy my life got, that I could do this. So that was another 3 months of doing it that way. My A1C went back up to 10, and my fasting glucose numbers were like in the 300s. And you're supposed to be between like 80 and 150 probably. And I was in 300s. And a new primary care doctor came into the office that day. And she looked at me, and I'm a very small person. I had lost like 10 pounds, 15 pounds in that many, in the 3 to 6 months period on the 2 metformin. And she was very alarmed, and she was very concerned. And she was like, why did no one with all your autoimmune conditions test you for type 1.5? Well, I don't even think she brought it up. Actually, in that time period, again, someone else that I interviewed on my podcast, her name is Lauren. She does a podcast herself, Good Gluten Free Grub. You should check it out. And especially if you want to know more about celiac disease and basic day-to-day life things with celiac disease, her podcast is excellent for that. And she had posted on her Instagram her type 1.5, or I don't even want to say it's type 1.5, type 1 diabetes diagnosis story as an adult in her 30s. And that her A1C was at like 13, and she found out because she had to go to the hospital. And I'm not telling her story right, and it's not fair, but this is what I saw on Instagram. And so that I looked up type 1, is it possible to be diagnosed as an adult? Not that I didn't believe her, but I was trying to figure out, is that rare, or is that something that is quite common? Because I had only heard of type 1 in the context of it meant your blood sugar was super low, and that only children would get diagnosed with that. So that was my understanding. And turns out there is this type 1.5. Lance Bass from NSYNC has it. And it's basically when you get diagnosed with a type of diabetes that has to be managed as type 1 as an adult. So I brought that story up to her, and I said, I've heard, it seems like based on my research, Dr. Google seems to think that if you have celiac disease or another autoimmune condition, it increases the likeliness of this to happen. She agreed with me, and then we got another round of tests. And then I ended up being right. My gut from the very beginning was right. So that was the beginning. There was a lot of insanity that followed after, and that's for another podcast episode if anyone's interested to hear. Battling insurance companies, trying to get the proper equipment, just trying to understand everything. that I can share with folks too if they're interested. But for now, I think that this is a good place to say I learned the importance of, if your gut is telling you something, say something, and you pursue that gut instinct all the way to the end. And again, I think about what's the worst that could happen in this scenario. I'm wrong, and I have to figure out how to live with type 2 and celiac disease and all the other things, figure out how to eat in a healthy way and sustain it. Do I change I was about to change my whole career, my whole life based on that type 2 diagnosis, because I didn't feel what was being asked of me was sustainable in the career that I had. And now could I live with that? And I felt that I couldn't. So I had to explore the other options as much as possible and get as many opinions as I could and take that through to the end. And again, standing firm of, this is what's possible. What can you do to help me make this possible? And not being afraid of that, not feeling like a burden, and it's triggering in a way of talking to people about this diabetes diagnosis. I'm having to I not only have to re-educate my family every single time I see them about my celiac disease and what it means, and it's a little frustrating, 15 years of having to continue to educate people every single day in my own family and people that I've lived with, but also now having to educate folks as I'm learning about type 1 and what all is encompassed with that. I'm having to I not only have to re-educate my family every single time I see them about my celiac disease and what it means, and it's a little frustrating, 15 years of having to continue to educate people every single day in my own family and people that I've lived with, but also now having to educate folks as I'm learning about type 1 and what all is encompassed with that. So it's been incredibly difficult, but fortune favors the brave, I guess, and that being persistent, staying true to yourself, staying true to your gut, keep going and trudging forward, and things are going to come back around to you, and it's all going to get worked out somehow. If you're reasonable and you're collaborative and make it a process where everybody gets to partake in it and gets to, come up with a plan together, then anything is possible. But everybody has to come in with that. And I've been very fortunate that I've had a lot of family members being like, okay, how do we, I think type 1 is a little bit more scary than celiac diseases, where people are like, oh, all I know about it is kids get it and you could die. And I think that has scared enough people into trying to learn as best as they can. And I wish people treated celiac disease with the same care and understanding and seriousness as they have with this other new diagnosis. But, we'll get there eventually. So I said, if you collaborate with enough people, things come back around. And I've been fortunate enough that I have been making friends with the people at Celiac Cruise, and they are a wonderful organization. If you listen to my first season, I talk about 2 of the cruises that I went on, and I went on a river cruise with them and I went on an ocean cruise with them, and I talk about the differences and the similarities, and that will be the first of many, many episodes about celiac cruises. But once I got through the other side of this, and the last cruise I went on was to the Bahamas. There's no episode about that one yet, but there will be in the future. They were kind of with me as I was figuring all this out, and there was a doctor on, as part of our program, and I was able to ask her some questions, and she was amazing and super helpful. And there were other people there that had type 1 and have been managing it since they were kids and gave me really great questions to ask my doctors. So every time I go on a celiac cruise, I always say I feel like I get a piece of my life back. So next year, it's really fitting that I'm going on 6 cruises with them. I'm so excited, and I can't wait to share in those adventures with you. And that is essentially why that we're going to bring this podcast back. I'm traveling again for work, and I'm traveling again through advocacy, and I'm traveling again through, the celiac cruises and all that comes with that. So I wanted to, again, as so many things were happening and big, huge moments were happening, I wanted to share on the positive parts of the journey as well. And this episode was a tough catch up. And I don't know how many people are going to want to listen to a type 1.5 or LADA diagnosis story. Maybe just Tommy is still here. Thank you, Tommy. But I know that if he's listening, he's getting a kick out of that. And yes, I know that I'm not supposed to call you that, but it's okay, Tommy. We're still best friends. But I'm just really excited. The next episode that I have is going to be talking about the trips I have planned. I know that there's going to be a lot that are going to come in the meantime, but it's going to start off with a bang and going to Australia and New Zealand. So I'm really excited for everyone to be part of it, for folks to, to share in it and to process it all with you. And I know that people have a lot of strong opinions, and that's okay, but make sure that when you have those opinions, share something constructive. Don't just say, hey, math ain't math and you don't know what you're talking about. I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm new to so much of this part of my life, and any tips or tricks that others can share with me, I'm showing where I'm starting off and then building from there. And hopefully, for the most part, 98% of the comments I've gotten back has been so supportive and helpful in this process. So please know how much I appreciate that. All right, without further ado, make sure you listen to next Wednesday's episode as well, where we're talking about all of the awesome trips that are planned for 2026. And I can't wait for you to join in on the process. And as always, till next time. Thank you for joining me this week for an episode of the Gluten Free Advocate. For more information on what's discussed on the podcast, check out the episode description and/or my Substack, The Gluten Free Advocate. If you have any questions or fun stories to share, feel free to reach out at hieatexplorelove@gmail.com. Till next time. This episode is produced by Leigh Francis Productions.